There are two ways to understand Peter's letter, It's almost always Paul's letter, so we get in this habit. It is Peter writing to the elect resident aliens. It could possibly be that Peter is referring to native Asia Minorans, folks who have lived their whole lives in Asia Minor and have converted to Christianity. Christianity was, after all, a foreign religion, and it led people to reverse established hierarchical relationships in their society. It caused people to live differently than their neighbors. It caused suspicion of immorality, insubordination, sedition. Because Christians were not participating in emperor worship, because Christians were doing as best they could, egalitarian living, those who converted to Christianity were seen as hostile. And it could be that Peter is simply saying that you are resident aliens in your own land. It could also be that Peter is referring to literal immigrants from other places, because this region of the world was filled with people who migrated from other lands. So either way, it has a similar audience of people who were minorities in their own place and in their own land, of people who were understood to be a risk to the nation, people who were even accused of being immoral just by their very nature. If you are a resident alien, you are by nature immoral, not one of us. So either way, this is the audience of Peter's letter, and they are suffering. They are outcast. Why somebody would choose to be outcast is a whole different question that we won't get into today. But they are. So, Peter is saying, here's how to handle it. I do want to emphasize that this letter is written before Christians were persecuted en masse. Okay, so they are not living under direct threat all of the time. They are simply, they are uncomfortable, and it hurts. And so Peter is saying, look, we all know that we belong to the household of God anyway, right? We are citizens of the household of God anyway. And this is still the first century, so they still believe Jesus is coming back pretty soon and will usher in the reign of justice and peace that they have been baptized into. And so there is not the sense of urgency that we might feel today if we are suffering. There is still in the 80s of the first century a sense that Jesus is coming back soon and all will be well, so just hang on until then. Right? So this is the context of what Peter is saying when he says, this world is not your home. You're just hanging out here for a while. And this sense of being other, this sense of being in a land that doesn't feel like home will change, and it will change pretty soon, so just hang on until you get there. And be good. Be good citizens. In fact, be so good that other people say, oh, we want to be like them. So, that's the letter to Paul. Things did change in the course of Christian history in many, many ways. The persecution got worse. The persecution became legal, according to the Roman Empire. that it became illegal to be a Christian. The persecution became deadly in ways that were even worse than just a few people picked off every so often. And so the Christian church had to decide how to handle persecution. It became a different recommendation of how to handle the persecution, which was to resist it. And that's where the martyrs came in the 2nd century and the 3rd century. Well, then it changed again when Constantine, we can spend hours talking about that situation, converted to Christianity. Almost overnight, that's an exaggeration, but almost overnight, it goes from being illegal to being Christian to being required to be Christian to being illegal not to be Christian. Right? And so then that's when the monastic movement begins, and the great battles within Christianity of how much we acquiesce to the state versus how much we resist the state. And that debate has been going on ever since. The Reformation, of course, is our heritage as Presbyterians, and so we look to the Reformation for some guidance as to what it means for us to be in that great debate over how the church and the state relate to one another. The Reformers, now remember, the church and the state were all one back then. The Reformers didn't actually change that. They created state governments, and then municipalities would either be Catholic or Protestant, right? That whole era was over the battle of what your community would be, Protestant or Catholic, and how it would be ruled. For the Reformers, it was actually the mark of a good Christian to participate in the life of government and civil society. What the Reformers said was that, going back to Paul, was that the civil authorities are God's representatives for establishing order and for upholding the well-being of society, to make sure people are fed, to make sure people are housed, basically to make sure people have what they need to function. The role of the church, of course, is to tend to the people's souls, to support people in being good citizens, and to hold the state accountable for its God-given role. So here's where our heritage comes. Inasmuch as those who carry civil authority are God's servants, this is from John Calvin, they are to be obeyed. However, when civil magistrates do not use their authority for the good of the people, or use their authority to oppress the people they have been ordained by God to serve, they are to be resisted. Okay, so it's still in our theology. It is not that the church is over here and does its thing and the state is over here and does its thing, and whatever, the state is ordained by God. The idea is that the state is ordained by God for a function, and when the state no longer forms that function, the church must call it to task. Right? Up to and including resisting, up to and including not following the law. Vernon Broyles, who is one of my long-term mentors, service to the national church in social justice ministry, and has his roots in the civil rights movement in Alabama, he writes in a wonderful article that I have reprinted for us and will be handing out in our adult ed. The final bottom line for Presbyterians is that our loyalty to God takes precedence over our allegiance to every other civil authority when their edicts and actions run counter to our understanding of what God requires in terms of justice, truth, and ultimate loyalty. I'll read that again. Our loyalty to God takes precedent over our allegiance to every civil authority when their edicts and actions run counter to our understanding of what God requires in terms of justice, truth, and ultimate loyalty. Now here's the rub for Presbyterians. Who is the our? Right? Our loyalty. Well, in our system, there is no one person who says this is what the church or the state should be doing and it's not, and so we are resisting. Right? In our system, we discern in community. And different communities over time have made different discernments about whether or not and how to resist the state or hold the state accountable. And we are here at First United in one of those discernments. We are here trying to think through what it would be to formally acknowledge that we are a sanctuary congregation. That has a lot of ways of understanding what it means, but one very simple one has to do with, are we willing to house undocumented immigrants in fear of deportation? Right? And it could lead to charges, felony charges. Right? So this is this big risk. And in fact, there's a lot of conversation happening, and I'm not even sure today I want to say that we, by God, need to do this. What I want us to think through today is what it would mean to put ourselves at legal risk because of a faith commitment. This is what we've been studying in the German history of resistance, right? The German church, the Dietrich Bonhoeffers of the world, the Karl Barths of the world, they did not have a sense that the state is inherently bad. They were just fine being leaders of a German Reformed Protestant church in a state functioning the way they believed the state should function, which was to provide care and a support base for all of its citizens and to maintain the order. It was when the state, in their view, became immoral, became oppressive, became a state that co-opted the church for its own purposes, and at the same time, the church acquiesced. That was when they decided, here we stand, so help us God, we must resist. And I want to say the same to us. Now, maybe in this room, most people are good citizens and would never think that just because the government does something, it's bad, right? But I do want to say that in sort of the sanctuary movement writ large, in the progressive movement writ large, the idea of bucking the state or getting arrested just for the sake of getting arrested is out there. And I want to challenge that, because I want to say that our allegiance is first and foremost to God, not first and foremost to creating a ruckus. Right? And if that means that we do then end up on the wrong side of the law, well, we do it because we have been compelled by our faith, not because we're interested in, what does Peter say, indulging our egos. You see where I'm going with that? This is a very serious thing in the Presbyterian tradition, to resist the rule of the state in which we live. It's a very serious thing that requires deep discernment, which is why today I'm not going to say absolutely let's do this. I think we do need to continue to discern what our role is in providing advocacy and support for those who have ended up in our country illegally. What I also want to say is that we do have a broken immigration system. I have been In 20 years, this summer I will have been in ministry 20 years, and we have been advocating for comprehensive immigration reform since the beginning of my ministry. 20 years is too long to wait. The system is broken. We have tried, and we keep trying to do it the right way. Our denomination, even last summer, has reaffirmed the ethical responsibility of congregations and governing bodies to defend the unity and integrity of families when an immigrant mother or father is threatened with deportation. And so some of us tomorrow will be doing that. Tomorrow morning at 9:30, we are gathering at the Homeland Security Office in Latham to defend Ricky, a Jamaican immigrant, father and husband living and working in Utica with no criminal convictions, and was told 2 months ago that he is now a priority for deportation. I hope you'll join me if you're able. And if you're not, that's okay. I hope you'll pray for Ricky and for those of us who stand with him. When I think of Ricky and I think of all of the other undocumented immigrants in our country, the letter to 1 Peter is so obviously clear. Yes, you are a despised foreigner, suspected of immorality, insubordination, sedition just by being here. Don't live up to their expectations of you, and be responsible in the communal institutions of your society. I believe Ricky has done that, and that we are citizens with him in the household of God first and foremost, and so I stand with him. But here's the real question. We were also asked, those of us on the rapid response team for this kind of action, if we are willing to risk arrest should Ricky be deported. And I have to tell you, I'm thinking about that. I don't know personally. But I do think we as a body need to think about that. Are we willing to risk arrest for the Rickies of our community? To pray about that, to seek the wisdom of the scriptures, and to seek the support of our congregation. I don't have an answer today, but what I do have is a very clear conviction that we are first and foremost citizens of the household of God, and that is our ultimate allegiance. I invite you to stand and join with me in the affirmation of faith from the Barmen Declaration that offers a similar conviction. Scripture tells us that in the as yet unredeemed world in which the church also exists, the state has, by divine appointment, the task of providing for justice and peace. It fulfills this task by means of the threat and exercise of force, according to the measure of human judgment and human ability. The Church acknowledges the benefit of this divine appointment in gratitude and reverence before God. It calls to mind the kingdom of God, God's commandment and righteousness, and thereby the responsibility both of rulers and of the ruled. It trusts and obeys the power of the word by which God upholds all things.